Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janai and this is Karmic Fixer Tarot. And this is week 3 of our Jungian Deck study. And there it is. I think I'm doing slower motions here so that I can ease into the voiceover in our booklet there. And week 3 of our deck study will introduce us to the Magician. This is the Magician in this deck. He represents the planet Uranus. And I guess if you're familiar with tarot at all, you've maybe noticed immediately the similarities and the differences between this deck, this Magician, and the Rider-Waite Smith Coleman. And these are the books that I've been studying along with the Tarot Psychology book and the Jungian Tarot and its Archetypal Imagery, both by Robert Wang. And there's a third book in this series, but apparently that book is really difficult to come by. And that incorporates the Kabbalah and Hermetic traditions. So I'm going to hope to get that third book. In the meantime, just leafing through the references that I do have. And these books are really insightful as far as companion pieces to this particular deck. And here we have my marked up notes in the Magician. And that's the short form of what the Magician represents in this deck. And with my thicker book, the Archetypal Interpretations book, the longer form, just leafing through. And I hope the outside noise isn't picking up here. But yeah, and this is the longer form chapter on the Magician. Now, this has been a very interesting read, and it's been helping me get to know my deck, or this particular deck. And yeah, so back to the card here. We can take a look at the card. And we can take a moment to drink him in. And I'm going to set a timer. Usually I like to set a timer for about 15 minutes as my overall um, meditation time with the cards. And we'll just kind of lock in on the Magician. I don't know why I'm motioning with my eyes. I hope that's in the frame. If not, I'll probably have a cutaway here. But yeah, this is a good place to start. Just give the card a cursory overview. And again, this might be helpful in studying your own deck. Um, I tend to give it maybe 5 minutes of just taking in the images, just thinking about what each thing represents before I get into maybe my deeper meditation. And as I meditate, I try to come up with maybe an inner landscape, a story, a meditation on the card, something that will help me really just kind of absorb the imagery and, start wrapping my mind around what the imagery represents. So, just to start, one thing that I've been doing, or that I started doing with this particular card, is I'll read the chapters in my companion books and take notes. And that kind of informs the way I interact with the card when I'm just kind of sitting and meditating on it. Now, you don't necessarily have to do it that way, but I'm a little bit of a bookworm. So that's my thing there. Oh, sip of tea here. Yeah, I'm probably going to have a cutaway so you don't necessarily see that. Try to do these in one take while I'm in the mood, while I'm in the flow. But yeah, we're looking at the card here. One thing that I found myself doing is as I was reading the book and just kind of getting a feel for the history around this particular card, I was curious about the implements, the instruments on the magician's table. And reading the companion books, um, Robert Wang talks about the history of alchemy. I won't necessarily get into that here, but we look at our magician, and our magician is indeed an alchemist. And so I Googled up what instruments an alchemist might use and found a lot of different things. Um, a lot of the instruments aren't necessarily depicted on this table here, but several of them are. Just kind of taking a look. And again, I might have a visual guide to point out which is which. But we have one item called the alidel. I hope I'm saying that right. A tall, kind of pear-shaped sublimation vessel, and that's used to capture and condense vaporized substances. Then we have another interesting one. We have the little retort. That's kind of the bulbous glass that you might see, the one that has um, the long neck curved down, and that is a natural condenser and a delivery tube of, I guess, of also vaporized substances or anybody. By the way, if there's anybody listening who has studied alchemy or just kind of the ancient sciences, let me know your take in the comments section. Um, that would be really helpful. And then there's also the mortar and pestle. Sorry about that. That's a little more common. A lot of us use those in our kitchens. I don't per se, but if you're grinding herbs and whatnot, it's also a very common tool to use in the practice of alchemy. And I thought it was really interesting that each of these tools are used to transform one of the four elements into another element. So we have the water into air with our alidel, and I didn't research exactly this, but probably the same with with the retort. And there's the mortar and pestle. I don't know why I can't say that, but it's taking the herbs and the earth, I'd say, and preparing it for the fire, preparing it to be burned, etc. So I thought it was really interesting that the magician on his table are tools that he uses to transform the elements that he uses. So the magician, it kind of just shows us a transformative archetype, someone who takes the elements and knows how to manipulate them, knows how to um, turn them into what he wants them to be, to say the least. So that was one thing I started thinking about, just looking at the card, just kind of taking it in. And I've noticed that the wand that the magician is holding is actually the way that it's shaped at the top is very similar to the way the Ace of Wands looks in this deck. So far, I think my plan has just been to cover the major Arcana cards. But if I do a deeper deck study, and of course, if you're along for the ride with that, you'll probably see the Ace of Wands card. Actually, I might do a cutaway of that card also as reference. We'll see how I feel when it comes time to edit. So now that I've focused on the card a little bit, now might be a good time to go ahead and begin to meditate and just take a moment to tuck in. We're going to go ahead and set our timer. Yeah, there we go. We're all set. And usually, what I like to do, and it's kind of a challenge for me, um, I like to go ahead and close my eyes and envision the card, envision everything that's happening within the card. And at this point in the week, I've had two encounters with the card. I call them encounters because, as I'm getting to know the card, as I'm just sort of meditating on the card. Oh, oh, what happened? There might have been a disturbance or itchy nose. Oh, I think what I was going to do, I'm not sure why I interrupted my flow to do this, but I'm probably going to go ahead and white out the, my notes on the card. Hmm. Yeah, this was actually, I probably mentioned this in earlier videos in this series, but this was the first tarot deck that I bought, which in hindsight, I wouldn't recommend this particular deck as a first deck. I probably should have just gone with the Rider Waite Smith Coleman. And but I wrote out the names of the cards and the planetary association with the card, um, just to kind of help me get to know the cards. But I think these cards probably work a little bit better. Maybe not, I'm not sure. But there's something about just kind of that blank space, which I guess is why the cards were designed that way in the first place. Um, I think it's a starker, more striking image of just the image of the card and no text, no keywords, etc. So it just allows you to interact with the card without any feedback from the text. It's just you and the imagery. But yeah, I would maybe at this point, after a few moments, maybe close my eyes again and start thinking of the image. And I think, as I was mentioning before, um, up to this point in the week, I've had what I would call encounters, two interactions rather, with the cards. Um, just kind of, oh, pardon me. At this point, I probably will have a cutaway unless you want to see me yawning and closing my eyes. But but yeah, my first encounter with the card was really interesting, and it just kind of made me think of modern day science fair. I mean, when you think about the magician, and the magician in this deck represents the archetype of the sun. We have the mother, the maternal archetype, which was the empress, which we covered in week one. We had the paternal archetype, which was the emperor, which we covered in week two, last week. Now we have the magician, the archetype of the sun. So if you have a closer look at the magician's face, to me, um, this to me the magician, very sort of adolescent young face. Frankly, he looks kind of like kids I went to high school with. So just kind of this youthful face, this sort of floppy hair. Um, to me, just kind of thinking about the youth of this particular magician and the fact that he's standing, the fact that he's at his work desk, he's at his stand with his different instruments. The first thing that kind of popped into my mind was like a modern day science fair that you might have at a school, that you might have in high school, and the magician was maybe one of the students. And again, this is my first encounter, um, and it kind of made me wonder. I kind of was thinking, is there a self consciousness about being watched? You know, maybe the magician, he's standing, he's at his work desk, a work table. He's got the instruments for alchemy. I think it's really interesting also that he's got his arm in the air. I'm not sure if he's waving at somebody or if he's doing a magical, practical sort of flourish. It looks like a salutation, which I find very interesting, which I also find very youthful and earnest. Even though looking at the face, to me, there seems to be a slight sort of perturbance in his face. I don't know if perturbance is a word, but I don't know if it's an anxiousness, nervousness about being watched, about perhaps being judged. Again, if this kind of has the feel of, say, somebody walking up to his workspace and evaluating what he's doing or asking questions about what he's doing, can that bring about any self consciousness? Does that bring about any nervousness or annoyance at being judged? One of the things that came to mind, or maybe somebody's asking him about the missing alchemy instruments. There isn't an alembic or an athanor, and feel free to research those, I guess. Or maybe there's an admonishment in the offing. I'm noticing how the magician is holding his wand. It seems a little precarious the way he's holding it over an open flame, and this seems like a rather massive open flame on his work desk. Could there be an admonishment, from someone like, say, his mother, the empress? Oh, you'll burn yourself holding the wand over a flame like that. Or maybe there is an admonishment from the emperor, the father. Maybe he's saying something to the effect of your form is a bit lax for what you're trying to summon. You should tighten up a little bit. Or maybe somebody else notices if you look at the table, there is actually a little fly on that table. Maybe somebody has made notice of the fly, or since the magician is outdoors, maybe no one would pay any attention at all to the fly. I think it's really interesting. He's doing alchemy outdoors instead of in a secret enclosure or a dungeon. But perhaps it's better to do alchemy outdoors, um, not in an enclosed space, not running the risk of, you know, chemicals, fumes in the air. Maybe it's better to be out in an open space doing one's alchemy. Perhaps one of the things that kind of came about, at least for me, was the feeling that I might be making the sun slash the magician nervous by watching him while he works. So there is a part of me that didn't necessarily hold the magician's image in my imagination. I kind of averted my imagination away from the emperor toward the other elements in the card. Behind the magician, did I say emperor just then? My apologies. Behind the magician, you can see the sun and the moon. They look to be in conjunction with each other. And if you look at the expression on the sun and the moon's faces, I find those expressions a little harsh. But then that just might be a hallmark of the artwork of Robert Wang here. I think I've definitely cut away here, but otherwise you might see me yawning. I think I will make sure there's a cutaway here. But anyway, we've got the ocean in the background, and we've also got the grass. It's a very beautiful day, very beautiful surroundings. Is there the suggestion perhaps that the magician might have some control over the sun and the moon? The sun, as I've been reading in the guidebooks, there's a sun, or rather, the sun represents a sort of creation energy, um, a sort of energy that can manipulate the elements to alchemize, to create something that was better than what was there before. A combination of different elements to create something entirely new, a combination of something that's already established or familiar to create something new. And perhaps that's also embodied in the sun himself, the mother, the empress archetype, creates with the father, the emperor archetype, a son, the magician archetype. And that son goes on to create as well, to create independently of his parents and to create using his skill set, his mind, his understanding of high science for the time, which I thought was very interesting. So maybe the sun and the moon are imagery that suggests just kind of nature, creation, um, the luminaries behind him. Um, the sun being the luminary of the day, the moon being the luminary of the night, and the magician being able to tap into this cosmic energy, both with practicality, both with his scientific knowledge, but also perhaps with a touch of just natural magic, which I find really interesting. So, just kind of regarding the cards some more, um, I have a tendency to ask a lot of questions. I guess as I was interacting with the cards, the the questions came out as far as why would the magician be practicing magic outdoors, or what is the magician trying to make, or what can the magician alchemize for me? Um, and perhaps it's a thing where the magician is not being commissioned by somebody to do alchemy for a specific client or of a specific thing, but perhaps he's alchemizing for its own sake. And maybe we're not here to ask him questions. Maybe we're here to just watch and see what he can create. Maybe it's a creation in silence, which is why, oddly enough, interacting with this card, I had a lot of questions. And I personally, I'm the sort of person who asks questions out of curiosity. I was doing a preschool story time one time, and after the class, just kind of talking to one of the young storytime attendees, and they asked me, "Why do you ask so many questions?" Which always stuck with me. But anyway, I ask a lot of questions, and that's sometimes that can come across as perhaps judgmental or challenging or like a critique in and of itself. And sometimes people can take questions that way. But me, I ask questions out of curiosity. Um, Usually by now, I'd have given an invitation for you to mute me if my commentary or if my just sort of ramblings are interfering with how you interact with the card. So hopefully, if they were interfering, hopefully you went ahead and muted me. Just take in the card. There's also the multicolored sigil on the table, which I didn't know what exactly to make of it. To me, it actually looks like a button. There's like the little stitching all around and in the center where I guess maybe the thread would be. So I wasn't quite sure what to make of the sigil. If you have any ideas on what that could represent in Jungian psychology or in tarot or just in general, or if it has some sort of relationship to alchemy itself, let me know in the comments if that's something that you're well versed in or something that you have an interpretation for. But yeah, this is the magician, and I'm probably running down to the end of my meditation time here with the card, which I found the magician to be very fascinating. Just kind of taking another look. Actually kind of made me think of my own older brother. I watching things that he does and maybe having a lot of questions. Or it also kind of reminds me of childhood, of watching television shows and, in the 80s and the 90s, of course, there's the educational television that was also made fun for children. Um, Mr. Wizard's World, Mr. Wizard's World comes to mind. And I'm sure I'm dating myself here. 80s kids remember Mr. Wizard. And I thought it was really interesting when you think of somebody who is teaching children science, chemistry. His name is Mr. Wizard. So there's that connection between wizardry, magic, and physical science. And yeah, I guess my timer has just gone off. So now is a good time to ground oneself and take yourself out of the meditation with the card, maybe with a stretch, or if you're standing, maybe stand and stamp your feet, or, like I like to do a few little neck rolls. I think I cheated throughout a little bit here. I don't know if my eyes were closed for the whole time, but keeping my eyes closed, it's kind of a challenge for me. But yeah, so that was our meditation on the magician in the Jungian Tarot deck. And I hope you got something out of that. I've been enjoying these so far. So let me know what you think. If this is a method that you would maybe use to study your own tarot decks, of course, again, with the companion books here. And I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. And I look forward to speaking to you again next week.